Hi guys, my name is Madrina Wand. I'm here with Lush Life, and we are sponsoring Planet Ardbeg today. Our presenters today are Cameron George, the U.S. National Ardbeg Ambassador, and David Blackmore, the Global Ambassador for Ardbeg and Glenmorangie. We want to welcome you back to round two for the Portland Cocktail Week, plus Ardbeg, plus the Edinburgh Whisky Academy Scotch Whisky Diploma. Today, Cam and David are hosting a masterclass on maturation with oak from around the world, flavor development in outer space, and subterranean maturation. So make sure you ask all the questions. But first, there are a few things we like to ask. Please like us on Facebook, subscribe to our channel on YouTube, and follow us on Instagram so that we can get more idea of what you guys want for content in the future. And then just make sure you're following along, comment below, and ask lots of questions. Enjoy.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Madrina. I'm super excited to be able to do this presentation with my good friend, my bosom buddy, the one and only David Blackmore. It's good to see you, David.
How are you, Cam?
I'm fantastic. You know, it is my birthday today, August 7th, 2020.
Really?
So I'm pretty excited. We're going to do this presentation, and then I am going to open up something that I've probably never opened before today from Ardbeg, and have a couple of drams here on my birthday. So it'll be a good day.
Nice. Congratulations, 21, legal.
finally able to drink this Ardbeg. I love it.
Right, love it, brilliant.
So David, you've been with the company since, apparently, if I'm only 21, then basically since before I was born. But
that's
no,
right.
For quite some time now, and you've gotten to know Dr. Bill Lumsden quite well over the years. Would you kind of give us a glimpse into who you know him to be, both as like the creative and then also the whiskey creator that you know him to be?
Wow. Okay. This will be the PG-13 version, I think, to start with. Funny, I actually had a call with Bill just this morning, and he is an amazing guy. He is eternally creative when it comes to pushing the Scotch industry in new directions. And I, for one, am very thankful for that. I know some would say, oh, tradition. I don't think that should be the case at all. We obviously have to have a nod to the past. But what we're in the business of, and what the Scotch industry has always been in the business of, is making delicious whiskey, hopefully. And his creativity, his drive is always rooted in that. So outside of work, he has an incredible palate, and he, if you've spent any time with him, he'll, everywhere you go, don't walk into a supermarket with him. He'll pick up everything and start smelling it just as a reference point. He's constantly trying to kind of improve his sensory library in his head of aromas and flavors. He dreams. And this sounds weird, but he apparently dreams vividly every single night, and a lot of his ideas come to him in those dreams. So he'll wake up in the morning if I'm traveling around the US with him, and we'll be in a hotel. I'll be there at breakfast, and he'll be asking for a piece of paper and a pencil to write down the latest ideas he's had, straight away. So an interesting guy, really into wine, very much into wine. I think that's part of what drives his kind of understanding of the whiskey world. He is a PhD scientist with a specialism in fermentation and yeast biology. So that absolutely, he's got the scientific background down as well. And I think the kind of artistic side of him and the scientist side of him really work well together to create these exciting new whiskies.
I absolutely agree. That's such a great jumping off point as well for us to start even talking about innovation. So if we could go ahead and pull up the slides here, we will introduce you to Planet Ardbeg. I will say that Dr. Bill's creative side not only benefits and graces the brand of Ardbeg, but when you were talking about his propensity for vivid dreaming, it made me remember the whiskeys like a tale of cake that he's made over on the Glenmorangie side, a tale of winter as well, which is another one of his fantastic projects that he worked over at our sister distillery, the Glenmorangie, which actually, thank you. We didn't really get a chance to thank you enough, and thank you profusely enough for taking us back to Glenmoe on our earlier trip this year and letting us stay in Dr. Bill's Lighthouse, which is the innovation distillery that they've set up over at Glenmoe.
Yeah, and it's funny. Whilst the Lighthouse innovation plant at Glenmoe has maybe stolen all the press in the last year or so, Ardbeg's expansion, in some respects, will allow us to do a lot more experiments as well. Because it's a bigger distillery, a bigger still house, we won't necessarily be at full capacity straight away, and there will be downtime where we'll be able to use that time to run all the experiments we want to. So that's good as well.
I think that's a really great point. Even harkening back to the talking point that you had mentioned about Dr. Bill's PhD in yeast and fermentation sciences. We have a very famed release from last year called Fermutation, right? Yes. That focuses in on the conversation of what happens during after the lag phase of a yeast life cycle, right? After it starts to go through autolysis and basically you have a degradation of the yeast's outer structure, and it basically spills its guts, which end up adding I love it. I use that analogy all the time. I got some a rise out of Vic for likening that process to the movie Aliens, right?
Yes, I like that. It's true.
And then the yeast essentially it bursts from the inside out, and all of the things that erupt out of it are things like lactobacillic acids and other interesting congeners like that as well.
All essential for flavor creation, for sure. So yeah, I mean, fermentation was another example. And whilst we're going to talk mostly about Bill's experiments and innovations with wood, it just goes to actually highlight that there's so much more. There's still more to be done in the world of wood maturation, for sure. Some say there isn't. You're wrong. I can tell you now, there's a lot more to be done. But there's a lot more to be done. They're right in that there's a lot more outside of just oak and wood management in whiskey to be experimented with, for sure. And fermentation is an example of one of those things that we are doing and have been doing for some time that actually has come to light. And other such things. Some of them are, like fermentation was an idea what we had and we were going to do, but trying to get time on the stills to actually shut the place down and allow for a long fermentation was kept on getting put to the back of the list. And then one day the boiler broke, and we were left with a fortuitous situation where we made the best of the situation and immediately employed one of the things on our list. And got going with it. There's been a few others like that, and I know some people say, "Oh yeah, whatever, marketing nonsense." Again, not true. These are genuine things that happened. We genuinely had this idea to do it, and when the boiler went, which happens at distilleries from time to time, surprise, surprise, this was the perfect opportunity to jump in and try this. So normally we'd have just, a distillery would probably have just dumped all of that fermenting liquid. Not the case here. We decided to let it go and see what would happen.
Absolutely, exactly. It's that moment when innovation also meets opportunity as well as necessity. Yeah. I think that has been part of Ardbeg's innovation strategy over the last few years. And to your point, the new still house increasing the theoretical output of the distillery benefits us in more ways than just being able to make more whiskey. It allows us to now control more uncontrollables and also take innovation and the fate of innovation into our own hands as well. So, when we're talking about the Ardbeg core range, one of the things I love about the core range is the way in which all of the whiskeys communicate to you that they are Ardbeg at their heart and soul.
Yeah.
Love the nuance and the variance that we're able to create by utilizing things like sherry casks, like virgin oaks. So if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about how the the Ardbeg core flavor profile manifests itself most clearly in the visage that is Ardbeg 10-year-old. But how do you see that kind of manifesting itself across the rest of the core range? And we can push into the next slide here as well.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, with Ardbeg 10, that was a conscious decision pretty much under the Glenmorangie company ownership to develop that as our core expression, because for a long time prior to that, what was the Ardbeg core flavor profile? There were all sorts of expressions. There wasn't anything that was really like a constant. And we decided to hang our hat on the hook of Ardbeg 10. We decided to use entirely American oak ex-bourbon casks, and we decided to do that to allow a lot of the underlying rawness of the Ardbeg spirit style to come through, but to balance it with just enough of the American oak style to kind of sweeten it, a little bit of that lovely vanilla coconut sweetness coming in, but largely with first, second, and third fill casks in the mix here. It was to really allow plenty of that Ardbeg rawness from the new spirits come through. And I've heard Ardbeg described as being mucky. And that's absolutely what we wanted to preserve as the core of all the Ardbegs with our 10. So American oak, probably the easiest to meld, the most subtle flavors into a whiskey was the way to go. Full maturation in a sherry cask, lots of people love it. Would it really have brought out enough of the underlying Ardbeg? I don't think so.
I definitely agree. And that's why I love the core range so much, is because that the 10-year kind of anchors and tethers all of the 5 other whiskeys in the core range, if you're including 19 or Trayvon as well as part of the core range in there as well. But things like Ardbeg Wee Beastie, you've got classic Ardbeg or whiskey in the style of Ardbeg 10 years old, except for not being 10 years old. It's effectively aged in first, second, third fill ex-bourbon barrels. And then you've got some whiskey that's matured in Oloroso sherry casks, and those things come together to create Wee Beastie. Same story for something like Ardbeg Anno as well, which I think those two whiskeys really do a great job of leaning a little bit heavier. I would say for Wee Beastie, maybe a little bit more punchy. For Ugadal, I would say it leans even farther into the mucky, the sweetness that sherry cask can start to bring to the conversation there as well. You're a massive Ardbeg Corey Vrecken fan.
I am. Huge Corey Vrecken fan, and I love the current Corey Vrecken. I know there's been some debate out there online that maybe some people have said it's not as good as it used to be. Hell no. I'm sorry. I beg to differ. The Corey Vrecken out there right now, in my estimation, is by far the best Corey Vrecken we have ever seen. It is better than the committee one for the very first one we released as a committee release all those years back. And that itself was a stunning whiskey. And I would be happy if anyone challenges me, to come and spend their money to buy all the past bottlings of Corey Vrecken and sit down and do a blind nosing and tasting to prove my point. I would be very confident in that, I have to say. And that's partly because the Corey Vrecken committee release was as intended, the 100% the recipe Bill wanted. But it wasn't really planned initially for Corey Vrecken to continue as a permanent part of the range. Through one reason or another, it ended up becoming part of the range. And Bill had to kind of, for a couple of years, work some magic with casks that maybe weren't exactly what he intended with that first release. But of course, he knew that Corey Vrecken was going to be staying around for quite a while. So immediately started filling the correct cask maturation, should I say, regime. And those are virgin French Limousin oak casks. Now, all these years later, we're back to the full component of those casks. And I think the current Corey Vrecken is magnificent. It's every time I taste it. Remember, we got a bottle at the distillery, and it was back during Fèis, and everybody, we were drinking some pretty fine Ardbegs. People had brought Ardbegs back to the distillery, and when we opened that bottle of Corey Vrecken, it blew everyone's minds how good it was.
Absolutely. I think that the experiment and the the employment of the French Limousin oaks is incredibly key to the spiciness, the pepperiness of that whiskey. You know, things like especially, you know, Corcus robur or European or French oak has about 70% more tannin than it does lignin. Which, you know, now we get to have a conversation about solubility of congeners and other solids within like the hemicellulose of oak. So for something like European oak with so much tannin, there develops a distinct, like, spicy kind of white peppery aspect. How else would you describe the flavor profile?
Yeah, Corey, you got it. I mean, white pepper is probably the best way to describe it. White pepper, maybe green jalapeno note somewhere in there as well. I get an earthiness in there as well. There's something slightly earthy going on. It's a tough one to really nail exactly what I'm trying to explain. I often find that the whiskeys I like the absolute most are the ones I struggle to explain the most. It's just that je ne sais quoi, that damn, that's good. It's the main point. But yeah, absolutely. The tannins there, the elevated tannins are really bringing in an extra dimension to the Ardbeg that is, for me, a bit like Ardbeg 10 plus Tabasco or something. You know?
Absolutely.
There's a kick to it.
You know, and then almost the complete antithesis to that, you have something like Ardbeg NO, which uses ex-bourbon casks, of course, some sherry cask, being Pedro Jimenez sherry cask, and then also virgin American oak, so Corcus alba. Again, Dr. Bill has great ties to our good friends over at Brown-Forman Cooperage as well, and the Brown-Forman Company. And the Brown-Forman Company, being one of the only American whiskey companies that actually owns its own sets of cooperages, has allowed Dr. Bill to do some pretty cool experiments with American white oak, specifically virgin American white oak. I'm wondering if you'd like to tell us about any of the past experiences or past whiskeys Dr. Bill has made, not only with Ardbeg, but maybe even the Glenmoe side as well there.
I've been very fortunate to actually be in the room. The last couple of times Bill has had meetings with the head cooper down at the cooperage there in Louisville, the Brown-Forman cooperage there. And it's absolutely astounding what those guys do. And the way that Bill has worked with them for many, many years now. And I guess a lot of it goes back to experiments that Bill did 15, 20 years ago. He was very concerned, even back then, that the quality of American white oak that the Scotch industry was using just wasn't there. And he could see things getting worse, not better. So he wanted to secure for Glenmorangie Company, Ardbeg Glenmorangie, and at the time Glenmurray, I guess, as well, a secure supply of quality American white oak barrels to start with, and then to see what he could do to improve the quality of those casks even further. So some of that was about the trees themselves, looking for slow growth oak, trees that are 100, 150 years old, that have grown very slowly, which means that you have if you cut the tree, when you look at the ring structure microscopically, you will have a higher percentage of spring growth, early wood to late summer growth. And that spring growth is microscopically more porous. When you make a barrel out of that slow growth oak, the barrel will be microscopically more porous, more spongy, and it will in-drink more spirit when it's filled. More spirit will actually disappear into the staves themselves. And the theory being that once the spirit's in there, it can really get it and hold of the flavor active molecules and pull more out into the spirit. So that's part of it, slow growth oak. Part of it is also about the charring or toasting regime we developed. We're not doing a heavy char for the vast majority of our barrels. We're doing a toast rather than a char. Again, you need to do a little bit of charring just to open the pores of the barrel up. Otherwise, no maturation pretty much will happen. But beyond that, we're looking for a toast which develops more caramelization products rather than anything sort of bitter and unpleasant. So that was a big part of it as well. And the third thing was, jumping back a stage, I guess, was air seasoning of that slow growth oak. So 2 to 3 years lined up outside, almost like giant Jenga blocks, for the natural environment to dry that oak, to stop it being green oak. And more recently, oak for barrels is oven dried, kiln dried in a matter of a few weeks. And Bill's opinion is that it's just way too green still to be making barrels out of, and whatever you put in those green barrels won't be any good, pretty much. So 2 to 3 years out in the open, which allows the weathering to happen, to leach out certain components you don't want in that oak, and to really develop everything you do want in that oak before cooperage. So all of that was kind of developed primarily with Glenmorangie in mind, but has certainly paid dividends at Ardbeg as well.
It definitely has. I think that especially after drinking Ardbeg NO with the group yesterday, the word oily kept coming around. And there was a conversation of oak lactones and vanillin and cinnamic acid and things like that creep their way into the whiskey. Mm-hmm. Just to add a little bit more context as well onto what you had said about toasting versus charring. Toasting, very similarly to even like toasting of bread, kind of creates something called the Maillard effect. Yeah, browning or a bronzing of wood sugars and a caramelizing of wood sugars, and so a lot of the flavor is developed there. In the toasting, the char level actually creates almost like a carbon layer, and that carbon layer is really great at catalyzing like sulfuric compounds and removing them from solution. So in a cask situation, you're going to have, if it's toasted and charred, you'll have an additive and subtractive kind of side of the equation that are happening almost at the exact same time.
100%.
The air seasoning of those casks is incredibly important as well, and can't be overstated or can't be understated enough, right? When you walk around the rows that they actually have the staves sitting in, you'll actually see on the ground there's a lot of oils and tannins that have leached their way out of the oak and actually sit directly beneath the super, super oily whiskey, to Michelle's point right there. Right.
And one of the things I like about Anno, particularly when we launched it, before Anno, the Ardbeg core range was 10 Ugadal and Corryvreckan. Mm-hmm. And I suddenly realized that Anno, in some respects, is the greatest hits. Mm-hmm. It's the greatest hits of Ardbeg. It's some 10-year-old-ish profile American oak. There's the sherry cask, Ugadal profile, kind of, broadly speaking, and the virgin oak. Whilst it's American virgin oak here and it's French virgin oak in Corryvreckan, it's kind of doing similar things. So very much bringing the three elements, the best elements of the three greatest hits of Ardbeg, bringing them together. And then I guess if we're going to talk about wood, this is a bit of a left field one, but we don't have to just talk about oak. We can talk about the Portuguese marrying vats that we have used to take those three components and let them sit for about 3-6 months. And we're absolutely not expecting any oak influence at all. This is inert wood. What we're hoping is for the wood to be allowing the spirit to breathe. And it's just like you're decanting a glass of wine and allowing it half an hour to breathe and become more than it was. These three very disparate types of Ardbeg brought together by themselves. Trust me, Cam and I have both tried this. When you just slam them together, it's very disjointed whiskey. So 3 to 6 months allows it all to knit and become a much more rounded, but still with its distinct component parts, final whiskey. And that 3 to 6 months allows it just to tone the flavor profile, the robustness down slightly, making it a more accessible Ardbeg as well, I think.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely agree. So on the screen here, before we move into the next slide, I did also just want to mention some of the other cask innovation projects that Ardbeg has worked on. Obviously we had mentioned the fermutation as well, which was more about the fermentation space at Ardbeg. One of my favorite and kind of greatest hits from Ardbeg Day a few years ago was Ardbeg Drum, which was Ardbeg, classic Ardbeg that was matured
Yeah.
in rum casks. Of course, there's Ardbeg Scorch as well here, and which is the second coming of one of my favorite whiskeys, Ardbeg Alligator. These were matured in ex-bourbon casks that were heavily charred. Alligator or level 5 charring of those casks there as well. Your thoughts on Scorch versus Alligator? Because Scorch is
now that is a debate that will run forever amongst the Ardbeg fan base. I don't think I have to choose. I like them both. It's a bit like picking which of your kids you like more. It's a pointless exercise. You know, I don't know. There's something about the original that just had such a to it.
Yeah.
But sometimes I think, well, maybe that's a kind of guilty pleasure. Maybe I need to have a bit more of a sophisticated palate, and maybe the more recent version is actually the better whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
It challenges me a bit more. What do you think?
Yeah, I would actually say I thought that Scorch may be a bit more nuanced and even maybe a little bit more herbal than Alligator was.
Yeah.
There was a punchiness to the way that Alligator communicated that heavily charred oak influence that Scorch has pulled back on just a little bit. You know, being a favorite child, I absolutely believe that you have to choose a favorite. so
that's what your parents always told you.
Exactly. Yeah, they told my sister and I we were both the favorite. Yeah.
You've left out any mention of roller coaster here, which maybe is one of the most exotic cask experiments. Where what was it, 10, 11 different casks?
Yeah,
ranging in age from, well, I think there was a cask from 97 as the oldest and a cask from 2006 as the youngest. And it was bottled in 2010, like that. And there was all sorts of the profile of the casks. There were, second fill, refill hogshead, first fill barrels. There was even a second fill sherry butt in there, I think, as well. All sorts of different casks. And the idea was to try and, well, initially, Bill gave his team the task of trying to create something that kind of had nuances of some of the youngest to some of the oldest stock over that 10, 11-year period that they were looking at. And he kind of drew a wedge. And he sent them off with that kind of wedge idea with a little bit of the youngest and more like this. They tried that, and his team kind of, good for them, tried it and weren't too happy with it. So they then started playing around and just varying the amounts. And in the end, they just came to what they thought tasted best. And when they looked at the percentages on a graph, it was all over the place like this. And that's where the name roller coaster came from, because it kind of looked like a roller coaster. Yeah, genius, aren't we? What amazing marketeers we are. But great whiskey for sure.
Love it. Love that whiskey. We're on mute here.
We're in trouble. We're in trouble. She's back. We're in trouble.
I was going to say, before we move on from the Ardcore range, somebody is in Barcelona and says he found a bottle for 150, and he wants to know if that's a good thing and he should pick it up.
First off, Matthew, absolutely. That is a steal. Now that whiskey has been released for a couple of months there. Ardbeg has this habit of it's nothing that we can really control on our side, but there happens to be a quite a escalation of Ardbeg's prices on secondary market. So $150 for a bottle of Ardbeg Ardcore is a fantastic deal there. And that actually, I mean, we can now start to talk about how innovation happens outside of simply talking about what casks you put that whiskey into after you've distilled it. Ardcore was quite interesting. You care to tell us a little bit about the high roasted or the black malt that we've used?
Yeah, I guess the whole thing here again, kind of springs from things Bill had initially done at Glenmorangie, and I'm sure plenty of you are familiar with Glenmorangie Signet. If you're not, you should be. It's delicious. And Signet was using chocolate malt, and springs from Bill's days as a fermentation scientist and his PhD, when he thought he was going to end up in the kind of beer world, I suspect. And it's nothing new in the beer world to use different roasting applications on the barley you're using to drastically change the nature of the beer you're making. You only have to look at something like Guinness, Murphy's, any of these stouts, and they're using some form of chocolate or black or some form of malt that's been roasted or toasted. But for whatever reason, partly I suspect the kind of unfortunate conservative nature of the Scotch industry, which Bill has spent his life pushing against, and partly the difficulties processing chocolate malt if you're going to apply the Scotch whisky laws, which require us not to use anything other than barley, water, and yeast. We can't use any enzymatic starters. We can't do any of that, whereas you can when you're making beer, usually. So for whatever reason, nobody in the Scotch industry had used chocolate malt before. Bill decided to give it a go. It saw our yields of alcohol per ton of barley drop through the floor. The finance team were pulling their hair out, but we made this amazing whiskey. And I'm sure Bill had the idea immediately, but certainly moved forward a few years, and it certainly took people like myself and Cam to be pestering Bill, saying, come on then, when are we getting a signet for Ardbeg? Yep. And I think if it had been you or I, we might have just used chocolate malt, and that would have been it. And of course, Bill is not going to do that. So Bill pushed it one stage further and used black malt, which is just completely destroyed. Basically, it's just falling apart kind of powder, and almost looks like espresso grounds that have been used or something. And he used a proportion of black malt here instead, which has created, far from that kind of chocolatey note, almost, and this is going to sound bad, but Ardbeg's full of freaky flavors, almost ashtray. There's a kind of there's a bitterness in there, and I, for one, really like that. This Ardbeg is definitely a divisive whiskey.
Yep.
Not everyone loves it. Some people hate it, and that makes me happy.
I agree.
The day we make Ardbegs that are crowd pleasers to everybody is the day we've really messed up.
Absolutely. I agree. And, just to kind of color in some of the lines there, a well-established and operating distillery will be able to create about 400 to about 410 liters of pure alcohol from 1 ton of malted barley. That there are other inhibitors, things like phenols as well. Yeah. So when we're making Ardbeg, the normal production for Ardbeg is about 390 to about 400 liters. We very rarely hit 4 tenors. For Ardbeg Ardcore, that yield actually dropped down to about 330 to 340. Because of the fact that you've roasted a lot of the protein and a lot of the sugar, effectively actually the sugar, has been degraded to the point where it's now no longer an incredibly viable fuel source or feed source for the yeast to now make as much productive alcohol by volume as
we're getting back to yields that weren't last seen in Scotland probably in like the 80s, 70s, something. Yeah. So it's a significant drop for sure. But again, always in the quest for creating interesting whiskies. We make great whiskies as our core range. They're wonderful. But we also strive to make creative, different whiskies, which are not going to please everybody every time. I hope people understand that. You're not going to fall in love with every single one of them, but your neighbor might fall in love with the ones you don't like, and vice versa. As long as we see that, we know we're doing the right thing.
Exactly. There's been this theme of, Ardbegs for discussion over the years. Yeah. And that truly is the nature of the distillery and the whiskeys that we do make, is that 100%. They should always be conversation starters and not necessarily only, skin deep in the conversation at maturation. Sometimes maturation takes a peaty twist as well here. There's a very fun Ardbeg that we can actually pull the presentation up for right now as well. One that was an incredibly rare release that came almost, out of left field, well, out of a field, as the whiskey was actually matured in a peat bog. So back in 2014, Dr. Bill had an idea. It said in 2014, an idea churned. Let's take Ardbeg to its smoky roots. Those smoky roots, of course, being the peat bog. So the distillery team, led by then manager Mr. Mickey Heads, we absolutely adore Mickey, took 2 casks of whiskey aged in second fill bourbon casks and buried them in a peat bog located near the distillery. They were set there for about 2 years and 10 months before they were unearthed. The whiskey's name is Ardbeg Fonage, which that is a very difficult pronunciation.
Right.
An American like myself there. But
don't worry, Cam. I mean, how fun? Okay, I get it. But
Aj, yeah.
What?
Had no idea. But even more difficult than actually pronouncing the whiskey was actually obtaining one of these bottles. 2 casks, both of them ex-bourbon barrels, so about 250 liters, producing about 456 bottles that were made available for purchase. And there's a level even deeper that we can dig down, because this was actually the first single malt Scotch whiskey to be sold as an NFT as well.
It was.
Yep. So
someone still needs to somewhat explain to me what on earth an NFT really is. I kind of get it.
Token.
I know, but still.
Getting to the 21st century.
The 20th century is to get into it. Yes.
So at the time, the bottles were sold for 1 Ethereum, which was about $3,000. Now, after checking my Uphold account, I both need a dram, but also know for a fact that Ethereum is trading about $1,600 to $1,700 right now there. So if you manage to get one of the bottles of whiskey, that bottle lives on the block bar space, but can be traded for your Ethereum to actually take it into your personal hold as well. There, we've got a pretty fun video here from Dr. Bill explaining a little bit more about the whiskey. Although he couldn't join us here today in person, he has sent himself in video form, and he does miss getting to speak with all of you. But hopefully you get to meet Bill very, very soon.
Yes, working on that.
Yeah. Love to play the video of Bill and Ardbeg Fonage.
Oh, hello. You might be wondering what I'm doing in this here hole. Apart from the fact that I'm very good at digging myself into holes, I'm here to tell you the remarkable story of Ardbeg Fonage, the whole story. Now, it's fair to say that we all dig Ardbeg, but some of us have been digging it more than others, particularly myself. Now, way back in 2014, under the cover of darkness and aided by the then Ardbeg distillery manager, we took 2 casks of mature Ardbeg whisky, second fill ex-bourbon casks in fact, and we buried them right here in the peat underneath my feet. You could say we buried them 6 feet deep. Now, why would we do that? Well, our inquisitive nature got the better of us, and we just wanted to see what would happen when we put these casks in conditions that were starved of oxygen, were damp, were mossy, were boggy, were mucky, just to see what would happen. And you know, in some respects, Ardbeg comes from the peat, so we thought it would be interesting to return it to the peat it came from. A truly groundbreaking endeavour. When we had this idea, we weren't mucking around. Fonage, which is Gaelic for under the turf, is our first ever subterranean spirit. And holy moly, what a kick it's got. You know, on the nose, it's got this astonishing, warm, mossy, spicy type note going on. You know, incredible warmth in there. And there's something slightly savoury in the background there, almost like grilling vegetables. So, I'm going to try a little sip. This is just astonishing. You know, I've never tasted flavours like this in an Ardbeg before. It's making me think of grilled asparagus, grilled artichokes, like baking rye bread. And in the background, there's something that reminds me of fennel covered in tar or creosote. For such an intense whiskey, it's got remarkable complexity as well. And for those of you who are lucky enough to get your hands on a bottle of this, I can assure you, you will not be disappointed. To me, this is the epitome of everything an Ardbeg whiskey should be. It's mucky, it's oily, it's smoky, and it has one hell of a herbal nose on it. So good luck, and I hope you manage to land a bottle, because this is a whiskey we can all dig. Flange.
Just absolutely love that whiskey and love the marketing behind it as well.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's another instance of the Ardbeg marketeers doing a fantastic job elevating the experiments that stem from this crazy man's brain.
Yeah, and I think it might shock people sometimes, our marketing. That's a good thing. I think Scotch whiskey, we take our whiskey very seriously, the way we make it. I don't see why Scotch whiskey needs to be so dreadfully serious in how it takes itself. Frankly, we want to have a bit of fun. We hope that you have fun when you drink our whiskies. Otherwise, there's a problem in many ways. You know, it should be consumed responsibly, but it's an entertainment. You know, it's affecting your senses, and why not bring that to life in fun, quirky ways? And that's certainly one of the things I really love about Ardbeg. It actually, in a funny sort of way, always reflects the kind of quirky side of life on Islay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's true to where it's from completely.
Absolutely. You know,
Anyway.
again, if I've said it once, I feel like I've said it 1,000 times, and our students are probably sick of hearing me say it. But whiskey, you know, it's one of the reasons that I love it is because it affects not only, you know, the way that you smell it, the way that you taste it, but then also how it feels and also how it makes you feel as well. So you're absolutely right that there should be an entertaining side to whiskey. And I think that our marketeers are genuinely best in class at, again, not just necessarily pulling and making up backstory, but elevating stories that are based or even grounded in actuality as well.
Absolutely. All the best marketing has to have an element of truth to it, grounded in a truth. And then, of course, you know, these are tongue-in-cheek stories. The ridiculous dad jokes from Bill in there. You know,
without so many puns there.
It's perfect. It's
Yeah.
perfect.
I love it. We've also got a quote from Tomas, who is he's everybody's boss.
Yeah.
Basically everybody's boss at Glenmorangie, at the Glenmorangie company. But this is one of his quotes, effectively, about Fonage. We're so excited to be launching this exclusive and the first NFT release from Ardbeg, one of the world's most collectible whiskeys. Our whiskey makers are always pushing the boundaries of experimentation. This is a chance to own one of their most intriguing creations to date, a true piece of Ardbeg history. And I absolutely agree that Fonage is a piece of Ardbeg history. It's something that it is uncharted territory for the whiskey industry. First off, to have whiskeys that have been released and matured effectively in a peat bog. I can imagine Bill had an interesting conversation with the Scotch Whisky Association.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Moving swiftly on.
Yeah, moving swiftly.
And I'll leave you. I'll just distract you with this. I was part of the kind of a think tank's a terrible name for it, but I guess that's what it was. We had some meetings back in the sort of 2009, 2010 timescale where we were encouraged to put just a lot of crazy ideas down. And Bill, to his credit, just despite his incredible reputation in the industry, was very open to having ideas from the group. And this Fionage represents one of the ideas in this kind of general theme of burying things in the peat bog, or other things in the kind of general theme that has seen the light of day. And I'll leave you at that, because it wasn't the only thing in that little group of ideas, for sure.
I love it. Maybe we'll see something from our sister distillery that stems into the peat bogs again. Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah. There's all sorts of lots of ways you could take the thought process from this idea, for sure.
That's fantastic. Right. So, I think it's interesting that, we get to have with Ardbeg, there's always an element of duality to the distillery, right?
Yeah.
When you think about the peaty paradox being this, this incredibly heavily peated whiskey that also showcases such levity and nuance at the exact same time. I see that most easily and readily displayed in Ardbeg 10 years old. The flip side of maturing something underground would be to basically take it to outer space. So Ardbeg became the first distillery to experiment with out of space a few years ago. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to, there we go. We have the tasting notes again from Dr. Bill. The waxy, a very salty, distinctive, very mossy nose as well. He called out grilled asparagus and artichoke were two of the nosing notes that I pulled out from the small sample that I was able to get my hands on. I did not end up getting one of these bottles. I was very upset.
Yeah, I didn't pull the trigger either, I'm afraid. Very close to, and they're still kicking around, Yeah. I have had a chance to taste it a couple of times, and I actually, funny enough, I may be able to have an opportunity to taste it again tomorrow.
I love it. Well, send me some for my birthday. I found that this was quite interesting as well. The coloration of the whiskey really did kind of stay almost in lockstep with that of Ardbeg 10-year-old. The kind of raw, pale gold, even auric gold. And then also the ABV being 45.5 was just a tinge lower than Ardbeg 10 years old. And interestingly, could theoretically be chill filtered, although I believe it is non-chill filtered.
That's correct. It was non-chill filtered. 46 ABV is regarded pretty much as the threshold, but really it is bang on 45.7 or something like that, 45.6. So I think they've just gone for it and taken the chance that it won't flocculate here. I think Ardbeg consumers generally are knowledgeable and know that it's not a bad thing if they see it slightly cloudy. Secondly, practically, Ardbeg's always in a green bottle, so you wouldn't see it anyway. And I don't think many Ardbeg drinkers will be drinking any of their Ardbegs on the rocks very often. So it's really not a problem.
I agree. I definitely agree. Right. So kicking on now into Ardbeg in space. This is one of my favorites. It looks like we've got our slides reversed here. But in 2011, the distillery launched into, there we are. Back in 2011, the whiskey ended up being sent up into space, and they launched the project. It was a collaboration with a company that was called Nanorax at the time. Can you tell us a little bit about how that relationship started to develop there?
Yeah, no, again, I can tell you from firsthand experience that this one, which is also, we've had accusations that marketing nonsense, it can't have just been this kind of this happenstance. I can tell you from firsthand experience it was. It turns out back in it was either late 2010, I think it must have been sometime in 2011. We must have been actually. Over the weekend, I received some voice messages and some emails all of which I kind of discounted and thought they were just maybe crank calls and emails, or at the time I was also the contact person if you sent something to customer services off the Ardbeg website and said you were based in the US, the email ended up coming to my inbox. And so I put it politely, each weekend I would quite often receive a few maybe not entirely sober messages from people sending me things. So I just kind of put it down to that and thought this must be a joke, because the calls and the emails over the weekend said, "Hi, I work for a company that puts small science payloads on the International Space Station. I'm also an Ardbeg fan. We've had a small payload from an educational institution in the US back out last minute. They're not ready. We have 2.5 weeks to launch. We'd love to offer that space to Ardbeg for free. Please call me." Now, at the same time, unknown to me, my colleague Hamish in Scotland was also getting the same calls. And Hamish, actually, with the time difference, Monday morning came around for him first. He picked up the phone and called them. And sure enough, it was real. And Jeffrey Mamber, who is the owner of and president of Nanoracks, big Ardbeg fan, had called us and had offered us this opportunity. So the downside was we had 2.5 weeks to pull this together. We got these in the end. We ended up getting these things called mix sticks, which are like kind of glow sticks. And we put new spirit from Ardbeg distillery in one half of these mix sticks. We put shavings from ex-bourbon American white oak casks in the other side of this mix stick. They're plastic sticks with a glass divide, just like a glow stick. So when you crack the glass and shake it, the reaction starts. And a lot of experiments on the International Space Station are done this way. So we had 3 sets made, a set that stayed at Ardbeg Distillery, a set that went to Nanoracks headquarters in the US, and the third set got the trip of a lifetime. And at the time, it was not on the space shuttle. It was on a Soyuz craft that went up in the NASA payload, actually under the seat, under the feet of the astronauts, went up to the International Space Station. It was supposed to spend, I think, just under a year up there. There were some issues with the space station and Soyuz crafts at the time, and it ended up staying up there for almost 3 years orbiting Earth. And what we were looking at, and this was really Jeffrey Mamber's proposal working with Bill Lumsden, was looking at a set of chemicals called terpenes that are important in all sorts of applications for humans, both in food science and other aspects as too. And looking to see if there was a difference in the way that terpenes were extracted out of the oak into the spirit in microgravity as opposed to down on Earth. So that was the experiment. We can't say we made Ardbeg in space because space isn't Scotland. Last time I checked, and we have to age in barrels of a certain size, and we were using little wooden slivers. So we did not make whiskey, but we can say Ardbeg went to space. So the experiment came back down to Earth. We ran all sorts of analysis on the spirit to look chemically for differences, and then lucky old Bill Lumsden got to actually taste this space spirit, and there was apparently a noticeable difference in the flavor profile.
That is wonderful.
Wild, right?
That's wild.
So we do have someone asking, what did the Scotch Whisky Association have to say about this experiment and some of Dr. Bill's other experiments? Because I know they've got a lot of guidelines, and they probably didn't want this to get called Scotch.
That's exactly it. As long as we don't call it Scotch, on which we've never claimed it's Scotch, it's fine. It was never for sale either. Tiny amounts of spirit went up there. This was about learning and trying to understand for the good of kind of, I guess, just scientific knowledge and potential industrial applications down the road, whether there was a difference and whether we could learn anything. Of course, if that Ardbeg spirit had suddenly become the most tantalizing elixir known to mankind, we would have a problem, because we then have to figure out how to have orbiting warehouses or something totally impractical nonsense, of course. Luckily, the spirit that came down from space, I think Bill Lumsden's tasting notes were something around cough sweets, cough lozenges, and fish oil. That's what he said it was like. So it was not an improvement, but it was different, which teaches us something at least.
Mm-hmm. And as far as the SWA, there are often hand slappings, it seems like, that are doled out in the direction of good old Billy Boy there. Dr. Bill is he not only works for the betterment of and the improvement of the whiskeys coming from the Glenmorangie Company, but a lot of his learnings, findings, and whatnot are repurposed for the betterment of the Scotch whiskey industry as a whole. Mm-hmm. So while I wouldn't call it a contentious relationship, I would call it a relationship that is full of checks and balances and then rebalances.
He's part of the consultative board that looks into how the regulations have actually been loosened slightly in terms of the type of casks you can use. So he's works very closely with them, and I guess his opinion correctly is that rules are there to be pushed against. Mm-hmm. A bit of dynamic, creative pressure. Nothing wrong with that, as long as you don't break them. Yeah, pushing against them, nothing wrong with that.
I love it. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at the Ardbeg in space video if we got that pulled up here as well.
It's a fun one.
There's one constant in all of our lives, and that's gravity. And it's only been in the last few decades with the space age that we can play around and do things without that force that we call 1G. And so that's what this project with Ardbeg is all about. What happens if you grow molecules, in this case terpenes that were grown in whiskey, with that 1G? What do we learn? The Ardbeg canisters had to travel to the same launch site where Sputnik, the first satellite, was launched from, and the first man, Yuri Gagarin.
And we had liftoff of the Soyuz.
This is a place where humanity took its first steps off the planet. To our knowledge, no one has really studied how terpenes react in microgravity. What we learn in this project is not just about Scotch. Terpenes are the building blocks in a number of consumer products. The question here is, as the terpenes are exposed to the oak, will they behave differently? Will you get a different taste? And for the past 2 years, they've been sitting there on the space station, hopefully aging away and coming up with all new flavors, we hope, to get it back down on the Earth. They'll put the nano lab filled with the canisters, the Ardbeg canisters, in the U.S. approved cargo, and we've reserved precious space at the feet of the astronaut. And they'll close the door, and they'll push back and decouple from the space station, and then they begin the descent.
And there is the Soyuz under its chutes as we are standing by for touchdown. Touchdown confirmed. Right on the button, 8:23 a.m. on the steppe of Kazakhstan, back on Earth.
And when they land, they remove the astronaut. Then they'll reach in and take out the American cargo, including our Ardbeg. They put it on the NASA jet, and it flies to Houston. And my guys take it off the jet, and we'll have some very rigorous examination working with the scientists at Ardbeg to see if the terpenes have behaved differently. It's been a long process with a lot of folks, both at NanoRacks, NASA, the Russian Space Agency, the cosmonauts, astronauts, all involved in this. That's why space is so difficult.
Every time I see that video, I get goosebumps.
It's the coolest thing. It's the coolest thing.
Yeah, it's the coolest. Yeah.
And I might add that as a follow-up from that experiment, that relationship with NanoRacks, we've actually developed quite a following amongst the space community, particularly the commercial space community across the US. And we've actually appeared. Ardbeg has been present at the Humans to Mars conference in Washington, D.C. for the past several years now, and more to follow on that. There's some exciting things in the works there as well. So yeah, it's fun stuff for sure.
Absolutely.
That's a very long-term learning. I mean, what we are going to practically be able to do with the learnings from that, who knows? But that's what pure science is about, to be honest. Lots of parameters we can control for as well. So totally understand that the experiment was somewhat flawed, but give us a break. We had 2.5 weeks to launch and an opportunity to do something for free. Scotsman loves that. So we did the best we could, and I think it was well worth it in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is the embodiment of progress and innovation. So many distilleries, tout or claim to be, at the forefront of the innovation space, the forefront of the progressive movement in whiskey. And I love that in a soft-spoken way, Ardbeg has laid claim to that for well over a couple of decades now.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
More to follow. I've got to bite my lip right now.
I know. Yeah, it's very fun looking at the brand plans for next year and beyond as well. Super excited.
Indeed.
And also for some things that may happen this year as well. But I think it'd actually be a really great time for us to actually pull up Dr. Bill's dissertation. So amongst the group of scientists who studied the samples in the lab, which is actually down in Houston, Texas. Dr. Bill actually did join them and then ended up publishing a dissertation or white paper that we have given over to our good friends here at Lush Life that will make that available for anybody who is incredibly interested in studying up on the impact of microgravity and the release of oak extractives into spirit. This is quite an interesting space. If we could scroll down just a little bit here, there's actually kind of a list. Keep going. There's a list, I believe it may be on page 2 or 3. It looks like page 3, that has a chart of the rate of extraction. There we go, of different congeners and compounds in the space station sample versus the Earth-controlled sample that sat at Ardbeg's warehouse number 3 as well here. Not necessarily that we should be able to identify these in terms of like their organoleptic profile, but knowing that they do exist is important enough. Like I've said 1,000 times as well, whiskey is quite literally a solution, yes, to all of our problems, but then also it's the solution of different chemical compounds, flavor contributing congeners, color contributing congeners, and also aromatic contributing congeners as well.
I would add that the earth control samples there, I suspect, I'm not certain, but I suspect that's an average of the ones from Ardbeg Distillery and the ones from Houston. So yes, I know it's a small sample set here, but we are seeing some differences. I guess, and that's where follow-up experiments, hint, hint, might be needed.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's just incredibly fascinating to see that the forethought that Dr. Bill and also NanoRacks and the space station put into this space, and how now there will be real world applications for some of the learnings to come from this program as well there.
Yeah.
Love it. Right. Well, it looks like we have basically burned through our entire hour, unless there are any really pushing questions here.
So we do have a couple questions. David is wondering what exactly he has to do to get to try the space whiskey. And I'm going to be totally honest, I want to know too, because that sounds interesting and fun.
To my knowledge, I think the samples no longer exist. I don't know where they are. I'm sad to say I never got to taste it. I held the samples, the space station samples, in my hand even, and I never got to taste them. It was very frustrating, but I think they've gone. I think the analysis process used up what little, there was tiny amounts of liquid, sadly. Sorry for the bad news.
Bad news. But you know, I would say invent the time machine, go back in time.
There you go.
That's
Or build a rocket.
yeah, exactly.
It looks like these classes have also sparked a lot of people wondering how they can come visit you guys out at the distillery. They really want to see Ardbeg in person.
That is a much easier and happier answer. Ardbeg has an amazing visitor center and cafe, and we would love to see you there. Jackie Thompson and her team are just epic. You'll absolutely love them, and they'll look after you really well. So please come and see us, and we're pretty much open year round. Shorter hours in the winter, of course, but yeah, come see us. Easy.
I love it. And I know Brittany is behind the scenes here and is probably chomping at the bit for me to say something like, you know, watch this space, and maybe we will end up taking a group there. Who knows? No promises. But,
funny, the subject was actually mentioned in a meeting I had about an hour ago. So it may happen. So for next year, maybe linked in with the EWA PDX course. Maybe we can get some people to Scotland.
I love it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, well, as there's no other questions, I guess we can go ahead and end this. I do want to say I hope you all enjoyed this class, and please, if you did, like or love us, leave some love in the comments. Make sure you wish Cam a happy birthday, either online or at Camp Runamok this week. He'll be stopping in. So if you want to see more Portland Cocktail Week classes, please follow us on either Facebook, YouTube, or even our beautiful Instagram. And then both of these wonderful men also have Instagrams where you can keep up with them. We have David at Glenmore. I can't even pronounce that.
Glenmore David.
And Cam is at Ardbeg Cam. So we also have a Portland Cocktail Week Instagram. We'd love for you to follow us. We do have Portland Cocktail Week coming up here in a few short months. And there are more classes just like this that are going to be offered there in person this year, which is really exciting. So, but yeah.
Fantastic.
Cheers. Slanjava.
Thank you, guys.
Slanj.